Once you've harvested your seeds, you need to make sure that they're properly dried before you store them. Seeds can appear to be quite dry, but they still need a little bit more time to dry and cure before you can safely put them into storage. Typically, it takes about 2 weeks for seeds to dry properly. Larger seeds are going to take longer than that. The conditions that we need for drying are cool, with dry air and good airflow around them. So you might choose to use paper bags, particularly if you have inverted the seed head into the paper bag when you harvested it. You can use baskets, but be really mindful that small seeds are just going to fall through. So paper bags are a really good option. And for larger seeds, particularly more for vegetable seeds, you might choose to dry on racks to make sure that there's really good airflow around them. By the time the seeds are dry, they should be really, really hard. If there's any doubt, I would recommend leaving them a bit longer. I've had cases where I've thought my seeds were dry, put them into storage, and then they went moldy. And that is even after they appeared to be dry and they felt quite hard. So if in doubt, leave them a little bit longer. Once your seeds are dry, they may or may not need some further processing. So as I said earlier, a dehiscent seed is going to come out of its seed pod quite readily. An indehiscent seed, you might need to bring it out of its seed pod. I showed you a little bit of that when we were looking at different types of seed pods. So a lot of times we're doing that by hand, just sort of breaking it up with our own hands. Some other types, like this fennel here, we need to pop off of the umbel. So we can do that by hand as well. Just a quick rub and they'll pop off from there. And we can have our individual seeds fairly quickly. So there are some types of seeds that might require a little bit more work. So further shelling or a process of separating out plant parts from the actual seeds. So one way to do that is with basically a kitchen colander. If the size of the holes are the right size, then your seeds will fall through and all of the rest of the kind of seed pod and other plant material, the pappus if there is one, that will remain in the colander and then all the seeds will fall through. So that's an option. In commercial seed production, typically a series of sieves is used and they shake them so the seeds fall down through the sieves and then all of the rest of the plant material is left on the screen. So that's a really good option, and like I said, you can mimic that with a simple household colander. The other thing that's sometimes done in processing seeds is winnowing. Winnowing is using the wind. If you have a plant part that's quite light but is not needed, and you put your receptacle out in the wind, then those light parts will be blown away and the seeds, which are heavier, will be left at the bottom of your tray. So you might have to do some kind of further processing with your seeds, and then when you're left with just the seeds in hand and they're fully dried, then it's time to put them into storage. Storing seeds is much like storing medicinal plant parts that we want to use. We want to protect them from moisture, we want to protect them from light, excessive heat, and so we keep them in airtight containers. So think about the seed. Remember that the seed coat on the outside of the seed is there to protect it until it's time to germinate. And what are the conditions that are needed for germination? Moisture and warmth, right? If we submit our seeds to a moist condition, they're more likely to go into germination. So we really need to make sure that if we want to keep the seeds in that latent form and prevent germination from occurring during storage, then we want to keep them away from moisture. So a lot of people keep their seeds in some kind of glass container. Plastic containers work really well also. So I'm going to show you one possible storage system just as an example of how you might choose to keep your seeds at home. So in this case, the plastic bin is keeping it airtight, and then inside the plastic bin we're able to store all sorts of different kinds of seeds. Now, if you are starting out to save your own seeds, you might choose to keep them separate from other seeds that you've bought, or you might choose to keep them all together. But this is a really simple system. You could use cardstock or recipe cards to alphabetize your seeds and maybe separate out your vegetable seeds from your herb seeds or your flower seeds. And keeping them alphabetical makes them really easy to find. So each of the individual seed types is inside a paper envelope, and then all of those envelopes go into this airtight container. So sometimes people choose to do that, which is a really great way to store seeds. But you also might choose to store your seeds in glass containers with airtight lids on top of them. The last thing that's really important as far as storage goes is to label your seed packages. They might look distinct to you now, but a year or two later, when you're going to look at your seed stock and trying to plant something, they might all start to look quite the same. You know, I have in front of me examples of all these different kinds of shapes, but there are plenty of seeds that look really, really similar. And I'll tell you a little story of mine, a little mistake that I made when I didn't label my seeds. I had seeds that were very small, kind of dark blackish brown, and I thought, oh yeah, those are California poppy seeds. And I decided to sprinkle them all along this little edge of my garden so that they could sort of cascade over this little wall, and I thought that would be really pretty. So I scattered all the seeds, and then a couple months later I was looking and I was like, why is there so much kale growing up there? And it took me a while and I thought about it and I was like, oh, those were not California poppy seeds. They were kale seeds, which are also small, spherical, dark colored seeds. So my mistake, I learned the hard way. But now I always try to label my seeds so that I know what's what and that the next season comes around and you can find your seeds really easily and you know which ones to plant where. In addition to saving seeds for use in the garden, there are many seeds that we use for other purposes, right? So like fennel here, I actually tend to harvest my fennel a little bit early because I want a nice aromatic quality. And you know, frankly, fennel self-seeds quite readily and I don't need it to go to seed all over my garden. So most of the time when I'm saving fennel seed, it's really actually for culinary or medicinal use. So I might choose to harvest it when it's really nice and aromatic. So there's lots of culinary seeds that we use. Coriander is much the same. I harvest it for use in the kitchen as well as for medicinal use and also for seeding in the garden for the next year. And of course we can be doing that for coriander seed or for the leaf for cilantro. And then we also have like milk thistle seed here, which we use medicinally. So rather than harvesting this for planting in the garden, perhaps we're going to use this instead to tincture or maybe encapsulate for medicinal purposes. So there's a lot of different things we use seeds for beyond use in the garden. So the last thing I want to talk about in terms of seed storage is how long are these seeds going to be viable for? That varies from plant to plant, and there's some pretty interesting research looking at the shelf life of seeds. So at the far end of the spectrum, we have evidence that some types of Nymphaea species, which is the lotus family, the water lily family, some lotus seeds have been shown to be viable after 1,000 years, and they were kept in an ancient bog. And when they were uncovered, they were able to be germinated even after 1,000 years, which is amazing, right? Other seeds are only viable for like a year or two. Something like Angelica has a very short seed life. But a lot of the herbs that we work with, the seeds are going to be viable for maybe 5 years. Certain plant families are known to have longer seed viability. That includes the mint family, the mallow family, the pea family, and the water lily family. Let's take a moment to review seed saving methods, and then we're going to move on to talk about using your seeds. So the most important thing is that we want to be observant and watch the timing and ensure that the seed is ripe on the plant before we harvest it. So we're looking for the seed to become full and have some substance to it. We're looking for the seed to change color to become more dark. Typically this is happening in autumn. And then we step in at that right moment, so when the seed is ripe, but it hasn't been taken by birds or by insects or other animals. It's really easy to harvest the seeds. We're typically just clipping off the seed head and then putting it in some kind of receptacle, allowing it to fully dry, and if necessary, removing the seed from its seed pod. From there, once the seed is fully dried, we can put it into storage. We're storing it in an airtight, cool, and dry environment with proper labels. And if we do all of that, our seeds will be viable for at least a few years, and for some species, potentially for decades. From here, we're going to move on to talk about how to use your seeds. So to complete our full life cycle, we'll talk about putting those seeds back into the ground to ensure that the seeds that you have harvested successfully grow new plants in your garden.